He shouldn't have survived the storm. A German shepherd, soaked to the bone, his ribs showing like old battle scars, barked from behind a locked door in a flooded Baton Rouge neighborhood long declared cleared. No one was supposed to be there. No one even heard him, except one man. A U.S. Marine, haunted by the ghost of a dog he once lost in combat, turned his boat back against orders. What he found wasn't just a dog. It was a soul left behind, and a secret someone wanted buried with the water. What happens next will test your faith, your fury, and your belief in second chances. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and if you believe God sends his angels on 4 legs, hit subscribe, because this story is one of them. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, once a bustling hub of music, magnolias, and heat-hummed porches, now sat in the exhausted stillness after the hurricane had passed. The storm had swept through 2 days earlier, leaving the sky overcast and the air heavy with the scent of soaked earth, diesel, and mildew. Streets were rivers. Mailboxes peeked out of water like periscopes. Telephone poles leaned at unnatural angles. This wasn't a city anymore. It was a waiting room for tragedy and cleanup. And in the middle of it, Captain Elias Maddox moved like a man haunted by ghosts. Elias Maddox, 42, stood tall at 6'1", broad-shouldered with a wiry build shaped by decades in the Marine Corps. His salt and pepper stubble lined a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. The lines at the corners of his green eyes weren't just from the sun. They were from squinting into desert winds and too many sleepless nights. His olive skin had been weathered by time and war. But what defined Elias wasn't the hardness of his frame. It was the quiet ache in his gaze. A man who had seen too much and buried too many. 3 years ago, during his final deployment to Iraq, his K-9 partner, Jax, had taken a sniper's bullet meant for him. The guilt never left. Since retiring, Elias volunteered during natural disasters across the South, not for glory or duty, but because he couldn't stand the idea of any living thing being left behind again. Today, he rowed a flat-bottomed rescue skiff through the Riverbend district of Baton Rouge, navigating the current claimed streets with a practiced hand on the throttle. Rainwater lapped at porch steps. Toys floated by like memories detached from homes. His partner for this assignment, Corporal Troy McMillan, sat beside him, checking addresses against a water-stained evacuation map. Troy was younger, maybe late 20s, stocky, with close-cropped blonde hair and an Alabama twang that made everything sound lighter than it was. He'd only recently transferred from logistics. He was brave, but not yet seasoned in this kind of quiet horror. "Next block is clear," Troy called, glancing at the laminated sheet. "All homes tagged red. Evacuated 2 days ago." Elias didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on a sagging, one-story cottage up ahead, half submerged, with peeling white paint and an American flag draped limp across the porch railing. House number 24B. A rusted mailbox bobbed nearby like a lost buoy. The wind carried a damp, sour smell. The house looked like it was sighing into the floodwater, too tired to stay standing. "Red mark on the front post," Troy noted. "Tagged for evac. We move on?" Elias narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't right. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in gut instinct, and his gut was rarely wrong. "Kill the engine," Elias said quietly. Troy obeyed without question, and the hum of the motor died. For a moment, there was only the slosh of water and the distant creak of a broken sign swinging on its hinges. Then it came, faint, barely audible, but distinct. A bark. Not the sharp warning bark of an animal defending territory, but a thin, ragged cry, punctuated by silence, and then another, weaker yelp. Troy looked around. Probably a stray, could be echoing. Sound travels weird over water. But Elias was already standing, pulling on his soaked tactical jacket. The rain had started up again, misting the surface of the flood. He stepped onto the bow of the skiff and grabbed the long aluminum hook pole from the side railing. "Sir?" Troy asked. "That house was marked empty." Elias didn't answer. He stepped knee-deep into the water with the ease of someone who had crossed worse terrain. The current tugged at his boots like something alive, but he pushed through, dragging his legs carefully toward the side entrance of the house. A half-sunken swing set groaned nearby as if to protest. The back door loomed, water halfway up its panels. A wooden kitchen chair had been wedged tightly against the doorknob from the outside, an unusual sight in an evacuated house. Elias reached forward and tested the knob. It was locked, but not bolted. He pulled the chair free with a grunt, water churning around his thighs, then stepped back and squared his stance. With a shoulder hardened by years of breaching, Elias rammed the door. The first hit thudded and echoed across the waterlogged street. On the second, the door cracked. By the third, it gave way with a sickening creak, and murky water surged into the house like it had been waiting to be let in. The scent hit him immediately. Mold, urine, old wood, and the sour tang of something alive too long in stillness. He turned on his tactical flashlight and stepped inside. The interior of the house was in shambles. Water-floated plastic containers, drenched newspapers, and a pair of children's rain boots drifting aimlessly. But it wasn't a child he was searching for. He moved through the hall toward the direction of the bark, carefully navigating floating debris. The beam of light trembled across cracked wallpaper and a staircase that led nowhere now. A second bark came, closer this time, then silence. Elias turned a corner and stopped. There, at the end of the hallway, behind a partially open door barely held by rusted hinges, sat a German shepherd, drenched, emaciated, legs trembling. Its fur was matted and clumped, a dark tan and black now dulled to a muddy gray. Its eyes locked onto Elias's, wide and frightened, yet oddly calm, as if part of the dog had given up screaming days ago. Around its neck was a cracked leather collar with a metal tag that had rusted over, but scrawled in marker across the leather was the phrase, K9 retired, no longer useful. Elias froze. That phrase wasn't from any standard unit practice. It wasn't medical or official. It was personal and cruel. The dog didn't growl. It didn't bark again. It didn't move at all, except for the small heave of its ribs. It was too weak. But its eyes stayed on Elias, waiting. He stepped forward slowly, kneeling in the water until his knees submerged. Reaching into his vest, he pulled out a folded emergency blanket, thin, silver-lined mylar, and draped it over the dog's shivering back. The dog flinched, but didn't retreat. "It's okay, boy," Elias murmured, voice low, barely audible. "You're not done. You're not forgotten." He carefully scooped the animal into his arms. The shepherd weighed far less than expected. Bones pressed against fur. It whimpered softly and buried its snout into the crook of his shoulder. Elias felt the breath hitch in his own chest. Jax, his old partner. Just like this one, loyal to the end. Elias didn't let the memory stay long. He stood and carried the shepherd out of the house. Troy saw him coming and stood at attention. "That a K9?" Troy asked, surprised. "Not anymore," Elias replied, stepping into the boat and laying the dog down gently on a wrapped towel. "Now he's just a survivor." As the skiff pulled away from the house, Elias glanced back. The kitchen chair still floated in the water, slowly turning. It hadn't been pushed by the flood. Someone had wedged it there, on purpose. He didn't know who had done it or why, but as he looked down at the trembling German shepherd curled in his lap, one thing was certain. This hadn't been an accident. The rescue boat hummed across the waterlogged streets as Captain Elias Maddox sat with the soaked German shepherd curled motionless at his feet. The rain had picked up again. Thin, cold sheets that slid across the flat aluminum of the skiff and stung like tiny needles against exposed skin. The dog didn't move. Its eyes were open but unfocused. Amber-flecked irises dulled to near gray. Its ribcage rose and fell with shallow effort, and each breath seemed to take more from the animal than it gave. Elias reached down, gently tucking the silver emergency blanket closer, but the dog didn't react. Not even a flinch. "Jesus," muttered Troy McMillan from the helm, keeping his voice low. "How long do you think it was in there?" Elias didn't answer. His jaw clenched as he looked at the dog's matted fur, tangled and crusted near the tail, the calluses on the pads of its paws, the way its back legs were tucked awkwardly under its frame like it hadn't been able to stretch in days. What haunted Elias most, though, was the look. That vacant, glassy gaze that wasn't fear. It was absence. He'd seen that once before. 3 years ago in Fallujah. That memory came like a sudden storm. His old K9 partner Jax, lying in the sand, one side of his body coated in blood, a shallow breath rattling in his chest. Elias had held him through the final minutes, whispering the same phrase again and again. I'm here. You're not alone. It hadn't been enough then. Maybe now it could be. The skiff pulled up to the triage point outside an old gymnasium, now serving as a temporary animal and civilian rescue center. Cots had been laid across basketball courts. Folding tables carried warm water, dry towels, and stacks of government paperwork that never stayed dry long enough to matter. A woman in a Navy windbreaker approached the boat as they docked. She moved with urgency, but not panic. There was a calm efficiency to her steps. This was Marta Levin, the coordinator of the Animal Rescue Unit. In her late 40s, Marta was tall and broad-shouldered, with deep brown skin and tight silver curls pulled into a low bun. Years in animal welfare had given her a firm demeanor. Blunt, unshaken, with a mother's watchful eye and a sergeant's voice when needed. Her left leg had a slight hitch, the result of a fall from a shelter ladder years ago that never quite healed right, but it didn't slow her down. "Captain Maddox?" she asked, eyes on the bundle of fur at his feet. "Call me Elias," he replied, lifting the dog gently into his arms again. Found him locked in a back room. Door was blocked from the outside. Marta's eyes narrowed. Another one dumped during the chaos? Not dumped, sealed in, like trash. She motioned for Elias to follow her up the ramp, where two younger volunteers rushed ahead to lay a clean tarp near a heater vent. Elias set the dog down gently. One of the volunteers, a quiet teenage boy with shaggy hair and an oversized hoodie that read Cajun Strong, began drying the dog's fur with a warm towel. "What's his name?" the boy asked softly. Elias paused. "Don't know. No tag, just this." He unhooked the collar and handed it to Marta. She turned it in her hand. "K9 retired, no longer useful," she read aloud. "Nice. Someone's got a real talent for cruelty." Troy stepped up beside them, his eyes scanning the dog. "He doesn't even flinch when we touch him. Think he's in shock?" "Worse," Elias muttered. "I think he gave up." Marta crouched beside the dog, inspecting his body gently. "He's dehydrated. Hip bones showing. Paws are raw. We'll get him fluids, antibiotics, maybe a sedative for now. We'll log him as found canine, male, German shepherd. You good with him staying here overnight?" Elias looked at the dog, who was now slightly curled around the emergency blanket like it was the only warmth he'd ever known. "No, I want to stay." Marta's brow lifted. "You want to spend the night in an old gym next to a trauma case? I've done worse for men who deserved less." A beat passed. Marta studied him for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "All right, Captain, we've got a few empty cots by the back bleachers. You can bunk there, just don't interfere with treatment." As Marta walked off to speak with a vet tech, Elias knelt beside the dog once more. The German shepherd's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to follow the movement. Not fear, not relief. Something in between. "You don't know me," Elias whispered, "but I know you. I've met you before, in another name, another life. You fought, didn't you? You served." He traced a scar near the base of the dog's ear. Small, healed, likely surgical. Maybe a chip implant. Maybe something else. "They left you. Not because you were broken. Because they couldn't see your worth anymore." He sat beside the tarp for hours. At one point, an older man with weathered overalls and a farmer's hat wandered over. His name was Red Thompson, a local rancher who'd lost 12 head of cattle in the flood, but still showed up every day to hand out kibble and sweep out mud. Red didn't say much, just nodded toward the dog and said, "Looks like he's been through his own war." Elias replied, "He has." That night, the gym echoed with distant rain drumming on the metal roof and murmured conversations between volunteers. Elias sat up long past lights out, watching the rise and fall of the shepherd's chest. He had no name for the dog yet, but that didn't matter. What mattered was he was still alive. When the sun finally crept through the east-facing windows, pale and yellow through the humidity, Marta returned with news. No owner called in, no chip data, no missing dog reports matching his description. Elias ran a hand through his unshaven hair. Then, "He's not missing to anyone except himself." Marta handed over a clipboard. "You want to foster him temporarily? Could help him stabilize. Dogs like this, if they've been discarded, they don't bounce back in kennels." Elias didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I'll take him." As Marta walked away, she called back over her shoulder, "You got a name for him?" Elias looked down at the shepherd, who had finally shifted his body just enough to lay his head across Elias's boot, the tiniest sigh escaping his chest. "Ranger," Elias said softly. "His name's Ranger." The dog didn't react, but he didn't move away either. The morning after the storm had broken, and the city began to breathe again, the Baton Rouge Rescue Shelter stirred with the slow rhythm of fatigue. The sun hung low, wrapped in a veil of thin clouds, casting a yellow-gray pall over the muddy grounds. Helicopters no longer circled overhead, but the air still buzzed with tension, like a town unsure whether to grieve or brace for more. The gymnasium-turned-shelter groaned under the weight of damp clothes, wet fur, and unspoken questions. Elias Maddox stood near the folding registration table, a clipboard in hand, and Ranger curled up on a fleece blanket behind him. The dog had refused food that morning, turning his muzzle away from the dry kibble and sniffing instead at Elias's boot, then retreating back into himself like a coiled vine left without sun. Elias could relate. The Marine's own sleep had been fractured, broken by flashes of Jax's final breath and the silent, hollow stare of Ranger, who hadn't made a single noise since they left the flooded house. Next to the intake tent stood Dana Murphy, the shelter's lead triage nurse for animals, holding a thick manila folder that had long since begun to buckle under the moisture in the air. Dana was in her mid-30s, short and sturdily built, with a round face framed by curly auburn hair hastily pulled into a clip. Her eyes were a sharp, steely green, softened only by the way she spoke to animals, like they were children who'd seen war. Years as a veterinary trauma nurse had taught her two things: trust the silence and never assume a creature doesn't understand what's happening. Dana squinted at the paperwork, fingers moving across the pages quickly. "What did you say the address was again?" 24B Riverbend, Elias replied. "No resident name on the mailbox. No human occupants when I searched." She nodded, flipping to a printed evac roster tagged Zone D Riverbend. Her brow furrowed as she read line by line. No mention of any K9 units or companion animals. Nobody reported leaving a dog, and this— she held up Ranger's collar, now cleaned and placed in a sealed evidence bag. K9 retired, no longer useful. This isn't from any official agency. Elias exhaled slowly. That was written by someone who wanted to make sure no one asked questions. Dana lowered the file. "Well, so far, no one's asking. I checked the chip scanner too. He's not chipped. Either it was removed or he was never tagged. We don't have a medical record, no registration, nothing in the disaster database. As far as FEMA's concerned, he doesn't exist." Behind them, Ranger stirred faintly. He lifted his head just an inch, then sank back down, nose brushing a tattered strip of olive fabric clutched between his paws. It had been buried under his fur when Elias had first cleaned him. A torn piece of a uniform sleeve, ragged and frayed at the edges, but still faintly marked with military stitching. Ranger hadn't let go of it since. He kept it like a lifeline, tucked beneath his chin, as if some scent still lingered, familiar and sacred. Elias crouched beside the dog, running a hand along his shoulder. "Still no barking?" Dana shook her head. Not a sound. No whimpering, no growl, just watches. "Smart," Elias said. "Observes first, acts later. Just like a trained K9. "Maybe," Dana replied. "Or maybe he's just waiting for someone who's never coming." Across the makeshift lobby, a teenage girl approached, dragging a wet duffel bag and a clipboard twice her size. She was part of the National Guard's temporary volunteer unit, identifiable by the oversized flak vest hanging off her small frame. Her name was Isabel Tran, barely 16, face freckled and pale, with long black bangs tucked messily into her helmet strap. She moved with the shy hesitance of someone unused to commanding attention, but determined to help. Excuse me," she said, voice light but clear. "We finished logging all the household pets turned in from Zones A through C. Ranger still doesn't match any known evac address or pet list." "Thanks, Izzy," Dana said gently, taking the clipboard. "Can you help unload more blankets from the supply van? Use the cart. Your knees will thank you." Izzy nodded and disappeared around the corner. Elias glanced toward the far wall, where the evacuees' message board stood, dozens of handwritten notes pinned up with clothespins and duct tape. "Has anyone posted missing pet flyers?" "Plenty," Dana answered, "but none describe Ranger. Most are lapdogs or cats. You'd think someone would notice a full-grown shepherd vanishing. Unless, Elias said quietly, they wanted him to vanish. There was a long silence between them. Later that afternoon, while Dana prepared IV fluid bags and volunteers bustled with cleanup duties, Elias sat outside the tent in a folding chair, Ranger lying beside him, head rested on Elias's boot again. The floodwaters had mostly receded from the main streets, leaving behind a film of dirty sediment, garbage, and broken branches. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the scent of mud and fuel and the metallic tang of stagnant water. From his coat pocket, Elias pulled out the strip of uniform cloth that Ranger kept clinging to. He examined it under the fading light. No name tag, but a faint hint of faded letters on the seam, enough to suggest it had once been part of a duty blouse. He looked over at Ranger. "Whose was it, huh? Yours or his?" The dog didn't lift his head, but his ears flicked forward, just a twitch. "You've been waiting a long time for someone to come back, haven't you?" Still, no movement, no bark, just quiet breathing and the faint pressure of the dog's weight against Elias's foot. That evening, Marta Levin returned. She stood with arms crossed, still in her navy windbreaker, hair pinned tight. She looked at Ranger, then at Elias. "Still no claims?" Elias shook his head. "No, and I don't think anyone's coming." Marta exhaled. "Then I'll put him on the official unclaimed list. After the holding period, we'll need to find a foster or apply for permanent placement." Elias didn't hesitate. "I'll take him, already started." Marta raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Elias gave a tired half-smile. "Some things you don't wait on." Ranger shifted slightly, adjusting his body to lean against Elias's calf. A pause. Then Marta nodded. "All right, I'll get the paperwork started." Late afternoon brought a thin, humid light to Baton Rouge, casting long shadows across the water-stained pavement and battered picket fences of Riverbend. The storm had passed, but the aftermath hung heavy in the air, a silence broken only by the occasional drone of a generator or the slap of soggy tarps in the wind. Elias Maddox stood once again in front of 24B Riverbend, the house where he had found Ranger. The porch sagged lower than before, swollen with water damage, and the American flag still hung limply on the railing, stained and forgotten. Elias had returned alone, with permission from the search and rescue unit, and a warrant secured through the temporary emergency authority. Something about this house had pulled at him. Too deliberate, too cold. He wasn't here for ghosts. He was here for truth. He stepped through the warped front door, flashlight sweeping over the waterlogged hallway. The scent inside had ripened. Damp wood, rotting food, and the acrid trace of mildew. The flood water had receded enough to allow clearer passage, and debris that once floated now sat stuck and mired along the baseboards. Elias passed the kitchen, where chairs were still overturned, and a shattered plate lay crusted with grime, but his focus was on the back of the house, the room where he had found Ranger. He walked slowly, listening, watching for anything that might have been missed the first time. The hallway led him to a door that still hung half off its hinges. Just above the frame, the wood showed signs of stress, splintered at shoulder level where he had rammed it open. He crouched low and swept the flashlight over the floor. That's when he saw them. Scratch marks, dozens of them, some shallow, some deep enough to gouge the laminate, trailing in chaotic circles across the room's entryway. The pattern wasn't random. It was desperation. The kind that came from an animal that had tried, again and again, to claw its way out. The scuffs aligned with the frame of the door, and more disturbing, the inside of the door itself was scored with furrows from nails. Ranger's nails. Next, Elias knelt closer to the door latch, noticing small remnants of twisted metal jammed into the lock casing. He fished them out with a pocket knife, fragments of wire coiled tightly and rusted at the ends. It had been looped around the handle, tight, secure. It hadn't been a careless closure. It had been locked, from the outside. His breath caught. This hadn't been someone leaving in a panic. This had been a deliberate act. A faint sound creaked behind him. Elias turned sharply, but it was only the wind shifting debris in the kitchen. He exhaled slowly and stepped into the small back room. It was no more than 8 by 10 feet. No windows, no vents. A tipped-over cabinet lay in the center, and along the far wall, he hadn't noticed it before, was a series of faint scratch drawings. He moved closer. Etched in uneven lines across the damp sheetrock were markings made not by hand, but by claw. The images were crude but clear. A stick figure, tall, arms out, stood beside a dog, both drawn again and again. Each repetition grew more ragged, the dog shape slumping lower, until eventually it was drawn lying down. Near the bottom, barely visible under the faint yellow of a crayon smear, were the words, "I'll wait." Elias stared. He felt something tighten in his throat. Above the makeshift drawing was a taped scrap of paper, now curling with moisture but still readable. In thick marker it read, "Do not open, old dog, unstable, dangerous." He tore it off the wall and examined the back. No writing, just duct tape. He folded it and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Just then, footsteps approached the house. "Captain Maddox?" It was Officer Rhonda Eves, Baton Rouge PD, assigned to property documentation for abandoned structures. She was in her early 40s, lean, with short-cropped dark hair and a scar that ran from the base of her chin to her left collarbone. A knife wound from a domestic call years back, she once told Elias. It had made her quieter than most officers, but not softer. She wore her uniform with precision and kept a notebook in her breast pocket rather than a phone. "Back here," Elias called. She stepped inside, scanning the room. "I came by for the report. Dispatch said you had questions." He motioned toward the scratch marks, the drawings. "This wasn't neglect. This was entrapment. I need to know who lived here." Rhonda nodded, flipping open her notebook. Property registered to a B. Cormack, male, early 50s. No active missing person file. House was marked evacuated during second sweep. No occupants found. No pets listed either. "Nope," she confirmed. "And no reports of animal surrender. Checked shelters, checked chip databases. Nothing." Elias handed her the folded sign. "I think they left him here on purpose." Rhonda studied it. If so, they didn't just abandon him, they condemned him. They stood in silence for a beat. Outside, the wind rustled fallen branches. The house creaked like it was breathing its last. Rhonda made a few notes. "I'll run the name. If Cormac's still in the area, he's either at one of the FEMA shelters or went somewhere off-grid." Elias nodded. "Let me know what you find. He's got questions to answer." Rhonda tucked her pen into her pocket and looked again at the wall drawings. He kept drawing the same man, over and over. "Dogs remember who they love," Elias said, "even when that love is broken." Back at the shelter that evening, Elias sat beside Ranger's crate, where the shepherd had finally begun to eat small bites from his hand. The dog was still too thin, his movements slow and measured. But he had looked Elias in the eye for the first time and held that gaze, just for a second longer than yesterday. Elias placed the paper scrap and a photo of the room, drawings and all, on the table near his cot. "Whoever locked you in there didn't expect you to make it," he said softly, "but you did." Ranger lay his head down on Elias's boot again. Not because he was broken, but because he was beginning to trust. The early light that broke over Baton Rouge the next morning was clearer than it had been in days. The rain had moved east, and though the roads were still slick and mud-caked, the haze had lifted. With it came a strange calm, like the city was holding its breath, unsure if it should mourn or rebuild. Elias Maddox stood outside the temporary FEMA shelter on the outskirts of town, staring at a laminated list of registered evacuees pinned to a bulletin board under a plastic tarp. He ran a finger down the column of names until it stopped at one, Brady Cormack. Location, Tent 17A. The name felt like broken glass in his throat. Brady Cormack, once a Marine sergeant, honorably enlisted, dishonorably remembered. He was 5 years younger than Elias, taller but with less presence. In the field, Brady had been quick, sharp, and dangerous, but unpredictable. During their deployment to Afghanistan, he'd been reprimanded multiple times for violence against civilians, insubordination, and one incident that had nearly cost a fellow Marine their life. The final straw had been a drunken outburst that left a junior corpsman hospitalized. Brady had been discharged before their final tour. Elias hadn't seen him since, until now. Elias stepped through the rows of tents, each one buzzing with the quiet disorder of temporary life. Families heating cans of soup on portable stoves, children coloring with borrowed markers, volunteers hauling pallets of supplies. Tent 17A sat near the back, beneath a crepe myrtle tree that had somehow survived the storm. The flaps were half-zipped, and from within came the low murmur of conversation and the slurp of instant noodles. Inside sat Brady. He hadn't changed much. Same hawk-like profile, same buzzed haircut that made his jaw look even squarer. But now he wore a clean blue polo shirt tucked into khakis, polished boots, and a self-satisfied calm that clashed with the grit surrounding him. He was seated on a folding chair, eating from a styrofoam bowl. Across from him sat a woman and a teenage girl, his wife, Melinda, tall and fair-skinned, with sunken cheeks and an exhausted posture, and their daughter Kaylee, maybe 14, tapping at a phone, earbuds in. Brady looked up as Elias approached. "Maddox," he said, casual, like greeting a neighbor at a barbecue. "Didn't expect to see you again." Elias didn't return the smile. "I didn't expect to find your dog locked in a back room while your whole house was underwater." Brady's brows lifted. He leaned back, took another bite of noodles, chewed slowly. "You talking about the shepherd?" Elias didn't blink. "Ranger, you left him behind. Chained, locked, with a sign calling him dangerous." Brady gave a snort. "Wasn't chained, I just wedged the door. Thought the flood wouldn't reach that far back. Besides, he's old. Not exactly field material anymore." Melinda shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Kaylee kept scrolling. Elias's voice darkened. "He clawed through the floor. He didn't eat for days. He was clinging to a torn piece of your uniform when I found him." Brady shrugged. "That mutt was more trouble than he was worth. Got too nervous around loud sounds. Probably would have turned on us sooner or later. You know how it goes. Some dogs just go bad." "You mean after serving with you?" Elias shot back. Brady set the bowl down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked up, eyes narrowing. "Don't come in here preaching like you're better than me, Maddox. You didn't see what he turned into. Shaking, whining, biting at shadows. I gave him a home, fed him, tried to train him up, same as I did when we were downrange. But he wasn't a soldier. He was broken. What was I supposed to do? Drag a dying dog through a flood for sentiment?" Elias stepped closer. "No, you were supposed to not leave a partner behind." Brady stood now, tension rising. He was a dog, Maddox. Not a Marine, not a man. Just an animal with a job he couldn't do anymore. You of all people should understand that. Elias stared him down, the years of discipline in his spine holding him steady. "I do. Which is why I'm the one who went back for him, not you." Melinda finally looked up. Her eyes met Elias's briefly. There was something behind them. Not guilt exactly. Regret, maybe. But she said nothing. Neither did Kaylee, who avoided everyone's gaze. Elias took a breath and forced his tone back to even. "You filed no claim. You made no call. You didn't even list him on the evac form." Brady crossed his arms. "Because I didn't plan to keep him. We'd been talking about giving him to a shelter for weeks. This just sped things up." "That's not giving," Elias said flatly. "That's abandoning." There was no argument after that. Brady simply turned away and sat back down, picking up his bowl again as if the conversation had never happened. Elias stood there for another moment, then turned and left the tent. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. The sun broke gently through drifting clouds, warming the makeshift gravel paths that twisted between the tents. Back at the shelter, Ranger had eaten a full meal and now lay stretched on a fresh blanket. His ears twitched at Elias's approach, and for the first time, his tail thumped once, slow and cautious. Elias knelt down and stroked his neck gently. "I found him," he murmured. "You don't have to wait anymore." The dog's body relaxed slightly. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. That night, as the wind picked up again and the floodwaters continued to drain from the streets, Elias filled out the official custody application. Beside him, Ranger slept. Not curled in fear, but stretched out, chin resting on his paws. No longer forgotten. The wind had shifted. It no longer carried the bitter edge of storm water and sewage. Instead, it tasted of something cleaner. Earth disturbed, but not drowned. In the field outside the Baton Rouge shelter, morning dew clung to patches of dry grass, while sun filtered lazily through the mesh of the fence. It had been almost a week since Ranger was rescued, and for the first time, his bark returned. It came quietly at first. Elias Maddox was standing near the kennel, filling a bowl with fresh water, when the low, hoarse sound rumbled from Ranger's throat. Not a growl, not a whine, a single unsteady woof, as if the dog was testing his own voice. He'd been silent for days, utterly mute, even in pain or fear, but now his amber eyes were locked on Elias's face, and the sound he made wasn't one of alarm. It was recognition. Elias looked up, a small crease forming at the corners of his eyes. He knelt, placing the bowl on the ground. "Hey," he said softly, "that really you?" Ranger took a cautious step forward, his movements still slow from healing joints. Then another bark, firmer. Not loud, but filled with something Elias hadn't heard since the day he lost Jax. Will. Ranger was coming back. Later that morning, Elias returned to the portable command center that had been set up in a retrofitted mobile trailer on the edge of the rescue compound. He pushed open the door and greeted Staff Sergeant Riley Humes, who manned the digital archive station. Riley was in his late 20s, built lean like a runner, with a clean-shaven face and fast fingers that moved across his laptop with near-clinical focus. He'd served a short tour overseas, then re-enlisted as a systems officer for disaster response. Quiet, cerebral, and usually more comfortable with code than people. "Find anything?" Elias asked, setting a thermos of black coffee on the desk beside him. Riley took the cup gratefully. "Yeah, took a while to dig through old server footage, but I found something on Brady." He clicked play. The video was from 2 years earlier, pulled from a veteran-operated YouTube channel. The timestamp read, May 12th, 2023. In it, Brady Cormack stood in a training field, arms crossed, a cocky grin plastered across his face. Next to him was a younger, alert German shepherd, sleek, leaner than the current ranger, but unmistakably him. Tail high, ears perked, gaze fixed on Brady like he was the sun and the moon. Brady's voice, sharp with bravado, rang through the clip. "This here's my right hand. I don't move without him. We've done the worst, seen the worst. Ain't no human that's ever had my back the way he does." The video cut to clips of Ranger executing commands. Heel, lie down, leap, disarm. His response time was near perfect. His eyes never left Brady. Elias leaned back, arms crossed. "Doesn't look like someone planning to dump a dog, does he?" "Nope," Riley said. "But wait." He clicked to another clip, grainier, from a private Facebook group, time-stamped 6 months ago. It showed Brady in his backyard, beer in hand, surrounded by 2 men in civilian clothes. Ranger lay off to the side, tied to a tree, visibly older and heavier. He wasn't engaged in the activity. He wasn't called. In the background, Brady was laughing. "Yeah, he's done. Doesn't even bark anymore. Doesn't follow worth a damn. Useless now, really? Should have just put him down last year." Elias's jaw tensed. "Send me both clips, and everything you've got from their metadata. You thinking about filing a report?" "Already did," Elias said. "This just strengthens it." He left the trailer and walked straight to the edge of the compound where the satellite uplink was transmitting reports to the Department of Military Justice. The field tablet he carried was already loaded with the footage, annotated with timestamps and witness statements. He stood by the terminal for several minutes, watching the upload bar crawl across the screen. At the end, he added a personal note. Request for expedited review of military conduct and potential violation of K-9 protocol under active duty care. Subject, Cormac Brady. Victim, K-9 designation Ranger, presumed retired without honor or medical discharge. He pressed send. Back at the shelter clinic, Dr. Joelle Kinney, the attending vet, examined Ranger on his 3rd post-rescue evaluation. Dr. Kinney was in her early 40s, medium height, with close-cropped hair dyed steel blue and a half-sleeve tattoo of animal silhouettes running down her right arm. She had a direct, dry sense of humor and a voice like gravel rubbed through linen, rough, but never harsh. "Your boy's carrying more than emotional damage," she muttered as she inspected Ranger's flank. She motioned for Elias to come closer. "See this here?" Ranger stood patiently as she lifted the fur with gloved fingers to expose a healed scar running along the side of his ribs. Faint, but long. "That's from a blade," Joelle said, "and not an accident. Depth and angle say it was driven in, not a scratch from debris." Elias clenched his fists. "And the back leg?" "Old tear in the joint. Looks like it wasn't treated properly. Would have caused chronic pain for months. I'm guessing he was left to self-heal. She straightened, peeling off her gloves. Whatever his past service was, he didn't retire into comfort. This dog was neglected, likely abused, and not just recently. Elias nodded. I sent the report up. It's under review now. Joelle rested a hand on Ranger's back. Good. He deserves justice as much as any soldier. Later that evening, as Elias was walking Ranger around the edge of the compound, a group of children had gathered near the fence. One little girl, no older than 6, was trying to coax a kitten out from under a shed. Her name was Maya, all curly black hair and oversized rain boots, determined beyond her years. When she saw Ranger, she froze. He's big, she whispered to her brother. Will he bark at me? Elias crouched beside the dog. Only if you ask him nicely. Maya giggled and took a step forward. Hi, Mr. Dog. Ranger tilted his head, his ears perked. Then, to everyone's surprise, he gave one soft, deliberate bark. Maya clapped her hands in delight. Elias watched the scene in quiet awe. The bark wasn't just sound, it was presence. Ranger was reclaiming himself, piece by piece. The sky above turned golden, then violet as the sun dipped behind the trees. Ranger sat beside Elias, tongue hanging slightly, eyes calm but alert. He had spoken again, not in words, but in instinct, in trust. And for Elias, it was the clearest sign yet. This dog had not been broken, just buried. Now he was digging his way out. The courthouse in East Baton Rouge Parish had seen its share of high-stakes trials over the years. Land disputes, custody battles, and even a few scandals that briefly made headlines. But that morning, the wood-paneled courtroom on the second floor was packed with an audience unfamiliar to legal proceedings. Veterans in faded service jackets, rescue volunteers in mismatched uniforms, and a cluster of local animal welfare activists holding handmade signs that read, "No one left behind," and "Justice for Ranger." Captain Elias Maddox stood at the front wearing his formal Marine dress blues. He hadn't worn the full uniform in years, but today wasn't about comfort, it was about clarity. At his feet, just to the left of the witness podium, sat Ranger, now visibly stronger than when he was first rescued. His coat still showed signs of malnutrition, but his posture had changed. He sat alert, tail tucked neatly, eyes scanning the room. There was no fear, just quiet observation, the way a trained dog watches his handler before a mission. The judge presiding over the hearing was Honorable Clarice Boudreau, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s with a silver bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice like tempered steel. She had presided over environmental violations and emergency protocols during flood seasons before, but this was the first case she had seen that involved an abandoned military K-9. Across the aisle sat Brady Cormack, dressed in a tailored gray suit that didn't quite fit him right, too stiff in the shoulders, too loose at the neck. His lawyer, Nathan Keel, a mid-level defense attorney, known for civil litigation and corporate claims, leaned in close and whispered instructions. Brady's arms were crossed, and his eyes kept shifting toward Ranger, not in guilt, in irritation. The proceedings began. Judge Boudreau's voice echoed off the walls. This court is convened to address the matter of alleged abandonment and abuse of a registered K-9 service dog during a declared state of emergency. The complainant, Captain Elias Maddox, may begin. Elias stepped forward. In his hand was the sealed evidence bag. Inside, the cracked leather collar with the now infamous words, K-9 retired, no longer useful. He held it up slowly. This collar was found on Ranger, the dog seated beside me. He is a German Shepherd who once served alongside me and others in combat zones, including Iraq and Afghanistan. He's trained, loyal, and saved lives. The judge nodded for him to continue. Elias's voice remained steady, though his jaw tightened. After the flood hit Baton Rouge, I found Ranger sealed inside a back room at 24B Riverbend. The door was locked from the outside with wire. There was no food, no water, and he was lying in a corner with this collar still around his neck. The home was otherwise evacuated. No one had reported him missing. He turned toward the screen behind him, where a court technician queued up video footage from a drone that had conducted aerial sweeps during the rescue phase. The footage showed a roof partially submerged in floodwater. From one angle, a family of 3, Brady, his wife Melinda, and daughter Kaylee, were seen being assisted into a rescue boat. There was no dog in sight. The drone zoomed out slowly, revealing that the entire rear portion of the home where Ranger had been found was already submerged in rising water. Elias pointed. This is the moment he left. He had every opportunity to alert rescuers. He never did. Next, Elias handed a set of photographs to the court clerk. They were passed up to the bench. Images of the room where Ranger had been found. Claw marks across the door, a soaked emergency blanket, and the scratched drawing on the wall. I'll wait. There was a pause. The air in the courtroom felt like it had thickened. Nathan Keel rose slowly. Your Honor, my client maintains that the abandonment was unintentional. The flood escalated rapidly. He was concerned for the safety of his wife and daughter. Elias spoke before the judge could respond. Your Honor, I understand panic. I've been in situations where decisions happen under fire. But this wasn't panic. This was premeditated disposal. The sign on the door read, "Old dog, dangerous, do not open." That's not someone fleeing in chaos. That's someone deciding who deserves to survive. Judge Boudreau folded her hands. Defense? Keel stood, adjusting his tie. There is no evidence that my client inflicted direct physical harm. The injuries on the animal, while unfortunate, could have come from the flood or debris. There's no confirmation that they were caused by Mr. Cormack. Elias turned to the monitor once more and nodded at the technician. A second clip played, an audio file this time, pulled from a recovered phone message stored in social media archives. Brady's voice, recorded at a backyard gathering. Should have put him down last year. Doesn't bark, doesn't move. Hell, tying him to a tree might have been a mercy. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Boudreau raised a brow. Is there any rebuttal, Mr. Keel? Keel faltered. We weren't aware of that recording. The judge turned toward Brady. Mr. Cormack, would you like to speak for yourself? Brady cleared his throat. Ranger was a good dog once, but he changed. Got skittish, unresponsive. I didn't know the room would flood. I thought he'd be okay until we got back. You were recorded saying otherwise, the judge said coldly, and you made no attempt to return, no emergency contact, no search notice. She paused, then looked down at the papers in front of her. I've reviewed the testimony, the video footage, the veterinarian's statement regarding unhealed injuries, and the history of Ranger's service. I also reviewed the complainant's formal application for permanent custody. She looked up. This court rules that Mr. Brady Cormack is to be permanently barred from owning or fostering any animal and shall pay a civil penalty for animal endangerment during a declared emergency. Additionally, legal and physical custody of Ranger will be formally transferred to Captain Elias Maddox, effective immediately. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Brady didn't move. His lawyer slumped slightly in his chair. But Elias? Elias turned to Ranger, who looked up at him and gave a small bark, low, calm, and certain. The courtroom didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. Something louder had just been heard. The sun over Baton Rouge had a gentler tone in the days after the floodwaters receded. Like it, too, was learning to breathe again. Mud still clung to the roadsides in ragged streaks, and the smell of damp wood and overturned earth lingered in the air. But just 20 minutes north of the city, tucked behind a grove of tired cypress trees, was a modest stretch of land that Elias Maddox had called home for the better part of a decade. It wasn't much. A faded red barn, a 2-bedroom cottage with green shutters, and a back porch that creaked like it had secrets. But it was peaceful, and more importantly, it was his. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Elias's aging pickup truck as he pulled into the drive. In the passenger seat, Ranger sat tall, the wind gently combing through the darker streaks of his coarse coat. The last few weeks had begun to fill him out again. His ribs, once visible, had softened beneath new weight. His eyes, once distant, now flickered with curiosity each time Elias spoke his name. The transformation hadn't been sudden, but it had been sure. Elias opened the truck door, and Ranger leapt out with a grace that belied his age. He sniffed at the base of the porch steps, then padded cautiously toward the screen door, glancing back only once to check that Elias was following. Inside, the cottage smelled of cedar and old books. A framed photo hung near the entrance. Elias, 20 years younger, in desert fatigues, shoulder to shoulder with a much younger version of Ranger. Not the same dog, of course, but close. That was Scout, the K-9 partner Elias had lost to a roadside IED in Mosul. Scout had died saving a team of civilians caught in the blast radius. Elias had carried his ashes home in a box that still sat on the mantel, flanked by metals no longer polished. Elias set Ranger's new collar on the kitchen counter. This one was different. No leather, no cruel inscriptions. Just a soft navy blue band with a silver tag etched simply, Ranger Home. Over the next few days, their routine settled into something like quiet grace. In the mornings, Elias brewed strong coffee in a stovetop kettle and walked the perimeter fence, while Ranger sniffed every corner like it was sacred. The barn cat, Tilly, a stocky orange tabby with a limp and the attitude of a monarch, watched from the hayloft with mild disgust as the dog took over her land. At first, Ranger growled when she came near. By the fourth day, he let her sit beside him on the porch as long as she didn't touch his bowl. The local veterinarian, Dr. Helen Roscoe, paid a visit midweek. She was a spry woman in her early 50s, with short-cropped silver hair and a habit of humming to the animals she treated. Dressed in practical jeans and boots, she moved with confidence and compassion. "He's coming along," she said, running her hands gently along Ranger's spine. "Still some scar tissue, some hesitance in the left hind leg when he pivots. But mentally, I'd say he trusts you." Elias didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into the cupboard and pulled out a soft blue ball, one with ragged edges and missing stuffing. He offered it to Ranger. The dog hesitated, then took it in his mouth, turning it over like it was something both precious and forgotten. By the second week, Elias began retraining. Nothing intense, just short sessions in the yard. Commands were reintroduced with patience and kindness. Sit, stay, easy. Ranger flinched at sudden noises at first. A dropped pan, the roar of Elias's chainsaw, but no longer bolted or cowered. Instead, he looked to Elias each time, waiting for his cue. One afternoon, a summer storm rolled in across the fields. Low thunder, fat drops of rain that hit the tin roof like drumming fingers. Elias sat by the fireplace, his laptop open on the coffee table as he typed up a delayed report for an after-action review he owed command. Beside him, Ranger lay curled on a woven rug, his head resting on Elias's boot, the toy ball tucked between his paws. Elias paused his typing and leaned down, gently scratching the spot behind Ranger's ear. "No more missions, buddy," he murmured. "No more waiting for someone who won't come back." It was a quiet moment, just the tap of keys, the hum of rain, and the presence of two souls who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Later that evening, Elias stepped out onto the porch to retrieve the boots he'd left drying near the door. He bent down and noticed something strange. One boot had been dragged several feet away, resting near Ranger's bowl. Next to it was a worn scrap of paper, the kind you'd find tucked in a pocket and forgotten. Elias picked it up. The handwriting was faded but still legible. "I'll wait." He froze. The same words that had been scratched into the walls of that flood-locked room. Elias turned slowly. Ranger sat nearby, watching him with steady eyes. Not anxious, not expectant. Just present. "You found this, huh?" Elias whispered. Ranger didn't move, but his tail gave a soft thump against the porch. Elias sat down on the steps beside him. The air was cool, the cicadas singing somewhere far off in the trees. He held the paper in his hand, folded it gently, and slid it into his shirt pocket. "You don't have to anymore," he said quietly, brushing a hand through Ranger's thick fur. "You're home." They stayed there for a long time, watching as the stars emerged one by one, no longer in hiding. The war, the flood, the courtroom, all of it had led to this stillness. Not an ending, a beginning. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come in silence, in the form of a wounded soul who refuses to give up, and a man brave enough to say, "You're not alone anymore." Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that even when the world turns its back on you, God sends someone to stay. Not because you're useful, but because you are loved. In a world that often discards the broken, this story is proof that healing is possible, and that no life, human or animal, is beyond redemption. Elias didn't just rescue Ranger. Ranger rescued him right back. So, if you've ever felt abandoned, overlooked, or forgotten, take heart. Your moment of grace may be just around the corner, and maybe, just maybe, This story found you for a reason. If this touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Type Amen in the comments if you believe every soul deserves a second chance. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of love, courage, and unexpected miracles. May God bless you and everyone who watches this.